So the consultation is looking at how control should be improved and strengthen the CFP to make it fit to deliver a sustainable European fisheries industry. The consultation paper itself identifies several possible fields of action to develop a new approach as regards inspection and control, to rationalise the rules, now we watch that one with interest, to strengthen the capacity of the European Commission to absorb the scientific evidence, the scientific data. Too often we see the scientific data coming in and the Commission will say, thank you very much, that's marvellous, and like me, not understand it. So when the political discussions then start, we're starting without actually a full understanding of the implications of what we're doing. The Commission will also look at harmonising sanctions. Illegal and unreported fishing is, of course, a major impact within the CFP, because if you operate within a system that's crazy, you'll do what you need to do to survive. So that means that the scientific data is skewed because the numbers of reported landings is skewed as well. We'll strengthen cooperation and assistance, develop a culture of compliance, use of modern technologies, particularly in terms of satellite imagery and better collection of data from the boats, and adapt the mandate of the Community Fisheries Control Agency. Now that's something which we do watch with interest, not least because the Spanish managed to get the headquarters of that organisation down to Vigo, which is indicative of the debate we have within the Common Fisheries Policy. So all the various weaknesses that have been identified, one of the things that has been put forward to remedy this is the new framework for fisheries data collection. As I've said, much more effect of satellite imagery and satellite data within the boats. It's crucially, however, the regional dimension is recognised. The Black Sea is a substantively different fishery to the North Atlantic. The Bay of Biscay is particularly different to the Mediterranean. There are different ways in which we need to do things. And we will see a strengthening of the regional advisory councils. Now, these are pretty toothless at present, but getting better. For our part in Scotland, we want to see regional advisory councils with teeth, regional advisory councils that set the policy. You have the nations with a particular interest in a particular fishery sitting round a table and discussing with the scientists and the industry how to manage the fisheries. Not having 27 different ministers, some of whom are interested, some of whom aren't, in dead of night in Brussels in December deciding how many fish there are in the sea. That would be a sensible way to go forward, and that is eventually, I believe, where the fisheries policy will end up. But eventually the result will be a more transparent system in which data collected at national level and regional level with EU financial assistance will now be made available not just to the scientific bodies, but also to the stakeholders, the NGOs, the fishing organisations, the universities, and all those stakeholders with something to contribute. So in terms of the cod recovery plan, we've just seen the publication of a further cod recovery plan within Common Fisheries Policy waters. Frankly, that's part of the picture, but it's a sticking plaster on the wider problem. We need to fix EU fisheries management full stop. We've also, more positively, a better news story, we have seen action from the European Parliament on fish discards. And of course, catching above your quota within the strict legal interpretation of the fisheries policy means that you should be throwing healthy, marketable fish over the side dead. Now that's not good for science, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for fishing communities, it's not good for anybody. And yet that has been enforced for many years within the EU's waters. That is getting better. On 31st of January 2008, the Parliament adopted a report by a Swedish Green member of the European Parliament, one of my colleagues, Carl Schlyter, and we adopted it by 616 votes to 22. There was almost unanimity within the Parliament that the current discards regime must be swept away and must be changed with something that actually works. So the Parliament has been taking steps forward. One thing which we've done from a Scottish perspective is something I'll put on the table to you as something that we can achieve within the Common Fisheries Policy, and to put on the table that we are very keen to work with you in the Faroes to actually push on more examples like this. In 19th December 2007, at the last December Fisheries Council, we brought something to the table in Brussels in the negotiations. And of course, to let you know the internal UK dynamic, the SNP minister accounts for 70% of the UK's fishing effort. The UK minister is not a fisheries expert, but our fisheries minister is in the Council of Ministers with the UK minister. And the cooperation actually is more positive than perhaps would appear. So we are having a much stronger voice for fishing within the Common Fisheries Policy. And one thing which we have been doing, actually without a formal legal basis at all, was a voluntary conservation management scheme in Scotland, whereby there was an agreement to grant full flexibility for Scotland to decide how days at sea are allocated. We've got a days management regime as well. How the days at sea are allocated, allowing extra days to be granted to vessels that adopt conservation measures. Now, this is the first time ever since the inception of the CFP that such significant management control has been passed back from Brussels to Scotland. Now, that's an example of what can be done within the Common Fisheries Policy. If you come up with a good idea and a strong case and decent allies to promote it, things can actually be changed. So in December, we had ratified something that we'd done. We'd just gone ahead and done it, a voluntary management scheme which has now been recognised by the December Fisheries Council as an example of best practice and an example of where the EU fisheries management needs to go. We also have the Conservation Credits Scheme, which gives the Scottish Government this flexibility to reward Scotland's fishermen additional days at sea, provided they have signed up to initiatives which have a positive impact on the conservation of fragile fish stocks. Now, by way of example, these measures include trialling and implementing new gear types to increase selectivity and to reduce the level of discards, as well as building on real-time closures, scheme which Scotland introduced last autumn, again without a formal legal basis within the CFP to do it. One thing which we're doing long-term, which I've been discussing with your Fisheries Minister this morning, we have set up a Sustainable Seas Task Force in Scotland. We're operating within a system that was not of our making, not of our design. We don't like it. But as Scotland's government, we can't just say we don't like it very much. We've got to come up with something that actually works in its place. So we're establishing the Sustainable Seas Task Force. We set that up in January. It's chaired by Richard Lochhead, our Fisheries Minister. And we'll have a small group of stakeholders who will be coming up with a fresh sheet of paper. How would we run the North Atlantic within Scotland's waters if we were not part of the Common Fisheries Policy? Now, that's a project that I'm particularly keen to work with Iceland, with the Faroes, with Norway, with Ireland, with our nearest friends who understand the fisheries sector, who understand marine issues, who get it. Because when I'm in Brussels and I'm talking to an Austrian with best will in the world, they don't get it. So our allies are looking north and west. Our allies are not necessarily looking south. So there is a lot going on within the European discussions, and in Scotland we have, I believe, a particularly interesting project for you guys to get involved in, and I sincerely hope you will be. There will be an invite being issued to your Fisheries Minister after our brief discussions this morning to come to Scotland, hopefully with the Icelandic Fisheries Minister, the Irish Fisheries Minister, the Norwegian Fisheries Minister, to sit down and talk about how would we do this sensibly. Let's take account of all the scientific data, all the impact of climate change, all the ways that we need to actually change the way that we manage fisheries and come up with a zone of best practice, a beacon of how to run fisheries best within the North Atlantic. We can then, within the structures of the European Union, use that to push forward a case for reform that will, I hope, turn the fisheries policy into something sensible. There's always going to need to be bilateral negotiations to manage fisheries because fish cross borders. Climate change crosses borders. We are interconnected whether we like it or not, and we need to reflect that in our governmental structures. And frankly, we need to talk to ourselves an awful lot more. So that's why I was here today. That's why I've left some time for discussion, and I look forward to hearing what you're saying to tell me to do in Brussels on all our behalves. Thanks very much.